Welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where we are arm-length truthers. I'm Brendan Clean, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's Sam Newman, an editor at Awful Announcing. We're back. It's Monday, March 2nd. We're here for you live on YouTube and X. Hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, bringing you live sports media content at 2 p.m. Eastern. All you got to do is hit that button, and you get it for free right into your feed. Let's talk sports media here on this Monday, Sam. We've got a review of the week, which we're going to start doing every week on the show on ESPN's new top NBA booth. They've been going for a while. We have not checked in on them. We will do that today. Mike Breen, Tim Legler, Richard Jefferson. But first, I'm just going to make this into a Stock Watch, which is our very stupidly named segment where we try to take the temperature of how sports media is feeling about something and whether that's sort of right or wrong. And in this case, the NFL Scouting Combine, which just wrapped up in Indianapolis, the annual circus of running drills and doing interviews and meeting young players. And it felt like the narrative out of this, for the strongest that I can remember it being, Sam, was very against the whole entire thing. You had Colin Cowherd. I saw Bomani Jones talk about this. It popped up on a ton of the biggest national shows that we see of people just being out on the whole thing. But let me just ask you, do you watch it? Do you tune into NFL Network and watch the Combine? Do you check out the scout guys, Daniel Jeremiah's and Todd McShay's of the world's recaps? Do you engage with the Scouting Combine?
Well, I think just because we are so engaged with sports media, I personally tune in. Am I watching all 8 hours? No, I'm not. But it can be a good background theater just to really get the mind and pump in on NFL draft content. That's kind of how I view it. I've never viewed it as something where it was like, I'm going to learn something that I haven't learned today. Stacey Dawes does an amazing job of that, but I think it's just more so about the prospects that I don't think, and Colin Cowherd said this and other people they've called it the underwear Olympics. So,
yeah.
And we have more and more prospects not doing it now. So
yeah.
It's just become a made for TV event. And it's a hard TV event. It's just really, you have to really, really love football to love this. And you don't really, really have to love football to really like the NFL draft. I mean, so I think this is just kind of a product of the NFL draft becoming a machine of content to where we all feel like everything has to be this, that, and the other. And I think the Combine can be valuable. And I've spoken to people who are, well entwined in the NFL draft circles who really use it as a valuable resource. And you saw all of these articles come out about things that people learned about free agency and draft prospects from The Athletic to other major publications. So it has its value for reporters, but does it have its value for people who aren't sports media nerds?
I'm not sure, or just the most diehard of football fans, right? I think here's how I would put it. That line of it, it's just more of a made for TV thing has kind of taken hold for sure as we do the stock watch thing. The stock is down and people are very much clearly feeling like they're just tired of pretending like this is entertainment. And it feels like it's a made for TV thing that also doesn't have the biggest stars. And I think that's kind of why it is now a problem for people, because it's a made-for-TV event where you watch defensive linemen sprint, who you may or may not have ever heard of, or, again, depending on how big of a fan you are. I feel like it's less of a made-for-TV event because, again, I'm not sure who's really entertained by this outside of the most diehards. I feel like it's a made-for-the-content calendar event because last week is a week that is in desperate need of sports content. We're not quite to March Madness yet. All you have is the NBA regular season, which we got a great week of games for, but that only takes you so far. And, the NFL is over, but people need football. And so it just fills the part of the calendar so well. And it's during the day, which, it's going to limit the TV audience, but it's something on people's feeds. That's where I think I have a hard time imagining that it goes away the way that, John Middlecoff of The Volume on an appearance with Colin Cowherd kind of predicted it would fade or strongly be reduced in stature within a decade. I don't buy that because, like you said, the NFL draft has become this massive TV property that ESPN has been chomping at the bit to keep every time they can. And there was a big bidding war for this past year. TV ratings are great. The attendance is like a small country every year. And the idea that can keep happening, and yet somebody's just going to, whether it's the league or these networks, are going to be part of a process of undoing the combine, that doesn't feel like those wins are blowing the same direction. I think if anything, there's going to be effort to put into this to try to make it work even better for TV or be more rather than less.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what the combine becomes once ESPN and NFL Network are kind of fully intertwined and we kind of see what the content plan is there on both sides. I don't think it's ever going to go away. I don't think it's ever going to not be a televised event, but maybe do we pull back from doing 8 hours of showing you every show? That's a possibility. I think if they leaned into the storytelling aspect of it, because like what Stacey Dials was able to provide, that's always great. But like you said, I mean, if you're seeing somebody from Southern Miss running a, 5 flat 40-yard dash that you've never heard of before, like it doesn't really do anything to get you entertained. And the whole point of the NFL draft is entertainment. But we also run into the whole fact with the NFL draft is people start checking out by like the 5th, 6th round where they're no longer entertained. And they're like, why is this a 3-day event? But again, it's the NFL. The NFL tries to milk every ounce of the calendar they can to make content. Now we could make the argument that maybe the NFL draft should be before free agency, but then we'd have to make the argument about what we do with the pro days. And I think the Senior Bowl is very valuable in those other bowl games. And yeah, I mean, it just goes into that conversation about the calendar, which we could have about college football. But I think the main point here is that as much as like we want to say, I don't want to turn on the TV to watch this, or like Colin Cowherd said that he turned it on for 20 minutes and then tuned into the NBA, but he used to be a big combine guy. It is what it is. It's always kind of been this, but the fact is the less players are doing it. But I think it's more so because more players want to control what they can control. And the combine isn't a very controllable event for them.
No. And that's been a trend forever. Right. And but then also, again, like I feel like the people that are critical of this thing aren't seeing the big picture, because those pro days are also content. Those are also televised now and clipped up, and those are feasted upon by diehard football fans as well. And frankly, even less diehard fans, because you're going to actually see Fernando Mendoza and everybody knows him. So that's content for everybody. And I think too, like when I say that this is a made for the content calendar type of spectacle, yeah, the NFL Network daytime coverage is maybe going to get the most focus because that's the most obvious thing. But when you look at the fact that Pat McAfee is live on site there, the fact that, Middlecoff, for instance, as a great example of somebody who went and did podcast recordings there, anything that is a big gathering of large swaths of any league now, it has a multiplier effect of what the content output is actually going to be. It's not just whatever the traditional television broadcast of that event is and how many people watch it and how long is it and do people like it. It's a whole, it feeds families, every one of these things. So I just can't imagine anyone turning down that opportunity. But yeah, look, I mean, the Cardinals have the 3rd overall pick this year. I didn't watch a minute of this thing outside of the clips that came out and different things like that. When they had the 1st overall pick and took Kyler Murray, same thing. I mean, I knew they were going to take Kyler, but I've never gotten into it, no matter how interested in the draft that I am. And I don't know if that speaks for everybody, but I just feel like there's a very built-in ceiling to the actual TV broadcast of this thing. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a world where they de-emphasize that part, maybe make it a little bit more behind closed doors and give scouts what they're wanting here, because a lot of teams aren't even coming to this thing because of how useless they find it to be now. Maybe they make it have more value to those talent evaluators because it's not so much just designed to be live television. but they keep the fact that, hey, if I'm Pat McAfee, I can go interview 6 awesome news-making guys in the league and get my content that way, and maybe kind of have it be a best of both worlds, because ESPN doesn't, like you're saying, ESPN doesn't need 8 hours during the day. They might need 2 really good hours of some kind of more packaged format, and then maybe that starts to get us back to a place where it kind of checks all the boxes it needs to, versus just this spectacle that everybody is turning against.
Not to push back on what you were saying about the Cardinals, but me as a Jets fan, unfortunately, I kind of noticed a trend here, and I think this might have to do maybe with this draft class specifically, but there was a lot of people throwing just dirt at this class that there's not great top prospects. And I feel like a tide has kind of turned since the combine to where now like Sonny Siles is the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, Peter Schrager made me want the Jets to draft Sonny Siles at 2, and I don't even know if they should. But like, that's the thing is I think we're searching for something here and searching for maybe hype to build up before the draft. Now we can make an argument about whether we think that it's beneficial for an underwear Olympics or why like no other league does this, but the NFL is the NFL. The NFL would film anything if it was going to get views and ratings. We know how the NFL works. I think people have to stop looking at it from the viewpoint of this isn't entertainment and we're not enjoying this. So it should stop being an event. I don't really think the NFL cares about that. I mean, let's look at it. Not it's in the same vein, but I mean, look at like preseason games. And I also mentioned to you like the NFL draft, like the rounds 4 through 7. Yeah. People don't really care. But like it still goes on and it's still going to happen because it makes the league money. Granted, the league would love to have more viewership for those things, but you know, they're still going to get viewers. It's so Colin Cowler doesn't have to like watching the Underwear Olympics, but it's still going to go on whether he wants to watch it or not.
Well, I think too, that's what makes the ESPN factor here so fascinating, right? Is because like, yeah, we're talking viewership. The best years of the NFL scouting combine get 500,000 viewers at their best. Like that's nothing, all things considered. But for NFL Network, which is also where those latter rounds of the draft air, you know, that's what these league networks are for. That's what the point of them was when they came out 20, 15 years ago, whatever. But now I think that math has changed. Cable TV audiences are down. How ESPN reimagines it, I think, is going to tell us a lot about how popular it actually is, how meaningful it actually is, and is there actually a way to make it more of a better entertainment product at all? Or is it just this kind of flotsam that gets thrown up on a platform and turn it on or don't, and that's that. But yeah, the NBA combine, you mentioned other leagues. Like I wanted to bring that up because I've been to it and ESPN does air it. And I think it benefits. It's one of the most strange reporting experiences ever had in this industry because everybody wanders around like it's private, because it is. You know, like I just see Pat Riley, like not worried about anything. He's just going to get a hot dog or whatever, you know, because these people can kind of handle themselves in that way. And I think that is probably part of this as well, where there's so big of a media presence now at the NFL combine and television presence and all that kind of stuff too, that I'm sure that people are sort of looking over their shoulders to just, can I even get my work done? Or is this going to be commodified in some kind of way that becomes a clip if I say or do the wrong thing, you know? So I think even just decreasing that and making it, again, just kind of a smaller, more compact, more clear-headed version of itself would go a long way.
I wanted to make a quick point just on that. I don't know if did you see this picture on X that everybody was talking about that Brett Coleman had tweeted out? If there was kind of like sparingly people surrounded around offensive linemen on Saturday. And I think that kind of just goes to the point that we're talking about, that you can't really compare this to other leagues because this is an all week thing and they do different positions in each day. So yeah, like people were commenting, oh yeah, because the NFL media doesn't understand offensive line play. And that may very well be true, but it's kind of hard to send somebody out there for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, just to cover people in their underwear. You know what I mean?
And expensive.
It's expensive. Yeah, exactly. Especially after they just sent some of these reporters to the Super Bowl for a week on Radio Row. So I think what I'm trying to say is it's such an expansive event that is so many days that I don't think we can compare it to other things, and we just have to recognize that it's in an NFL silo by itself, and it's just going to be probably a media property as long as these networks want to air it. And kind of going back to the point, like, we'll see what happens with NFL Network and ESPN and how I mean I would imagine this would probably still continue to air on NFL Network, but maybe ESPN dips their foot in the pond and say, hey, we want to air an hour of this when we have some programming break or something that we need to fill. Who knows?
And hopefully, as we keep saying, a better balance overall between all of it. Because these are dudes who want to get drafted, and you'd like the system to work for them as well. And I don't know if it's doing that either. If you have a handful of coaches not going and people complaining and everybody leaving by the last days, like that kind of feels like it's getting away from those guys getting their shine, which they're supposed to be able to do for these teams too. Of course, that being the purpose of it in the grand scheme of things. Review of the week.
I wanted to ask you one quick thing. Do you think it's just one of those events where it's just too much in the weeds for the casual fan, where like somebody like Colin Cowherd, and I hate to keep going back to him, but I literally just wrote a piece on this, says, I don't care about hand size. I mean, you cover the NBA scouting combine before. Do you think this is just too much in the weeds for a casual fan for it to be like an expansive media property?
I think the answer to that question, my head goes to it's the lack of the quarterbacks throwing, I feel like, is maybe the big part of why it's gotten worse as a TV product, because the thing about the NBA scouting combine, the NBA one, is they play scrimmages. And that's part of why it gets aired on television, is you watch the scrimmages, and like the best prospects don't play in those anymore either on the NBA side, but at least that's a basketball game. This is just the drills. If Fernando Mendoza threw on one of these days, I would imagine we would have had way more than 500,000 viewers for it, because that more closely resembles football. That's something a regular person could tune into for 30 minutes and follow it and have fun. What we watch on those days, it's just barely football. It's like this other thing. And I'd rather just watch, like, speak of Colin Cowherd, I'd rather just watch his show, frankly, than that. And I think the numbers probably bear that out. I think more people do watch Colin Cowherd's show than the NFL Draft Combine. All right.
Yeah, I wonder if it's too not enough of what people want to see, like Mendoza throwing, to where we're just kind of like, all right, we've had enough.
Yeah, measurements, drills, storytelling, just kind of a weird product. Review of the week. NBA on ESPN #1 booth in its first season amid a never-ending carousel of broadcasters at that chair at ESPN. Mike Breen still here, but Tim Legler has joined in place of Doris Burke. Richard Jefferson signed an extension and remained on this booth after calling his first finals last year. So those are the three: Breen, Legler, Jefferson. They were on the call Saturday night for the ABC Saturday primetime game between the Lakers and Warriors, minus Steph Curry. Blowout game. But Sam and I watched to take a deeper look at this booth as we head into the postseason time, and really when they will be under the biggest spotlight, with the NBA season being folks' focus here in the spring. Sam, what were your first thoughts on this trio, how they worked together, how they delivered on Saturday?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts here, and I had some takeaways that we can get to afterwards, which are two expansive questions that I think might be like, oh, wow. But I think my overall takeaway is it did feel like a booth in progress still, and I think that's fair, just because like these are three people who haven't worked together that much. I went quarter by quarter. The first quarter, it felt like Mike Breen dominated the entire broadcast, and he does. Like, that's what the job of a play-by-play voice. But I felt like he was almost giving more detail to whereas a point that Legler and Richard Jefferson didn't need to weigh in. And when Richard Jefferson did, it was very surface level observations. And Legler was giving you more of the color than Jefferson. So my first initial takeaway is like, are we better off with the 2-man booth here? And as time went on and we got in the first half and maybe into the second quarter, and the game is kind of getting out of whack here, I thought Jefferson finally started to come out of his shell a little bit. He was being critical of, some of the officiating, and they were, Legler was too. And I really felt like it was starting to come together, like we were seeing a cohesive unit, and that they were all like complimenting each other well. The one thing that I wrote here that is, I feel like Breen is the point guard, but at times he was, instead of just like facilitating, he's pointing to where they should be, if that makes sense. Like he would almost like say something and then like lead them into it, but he's like pointing to where they should go, as if it not so much Legler and Jefferson are bringing it up. And maybe that's a Mike Breen thing, and maybe it's just because I feel like he's really prepared and he's really good at throwing in stats, and I think he knows what he's talking about. He's very knowledgeable. He's an NBA encyclopedia. If you want to compare him to Mike Tirico, we could. But I don't know. I just felt at times like he was almost pointing to where they should go. Yeah. And we can come back to what I have, because I want to hear what you have to say on this. I just felt like the chemistry took a little bit to get going, and that was weird for me for a booth that has been with each other for a little bit now. And granted, I just said that like it's understandable, but it felt a little bit weird that the chemistry needed wasn't there right away.
Let's stick on the Breen thing, because I largely agree with a lot of what you're saying. I come at all of this with wondering why ESPN in particular on NBA seems to insist on 3-person booths. We've talked about that a ton on this show since it started, and I don't get it. I just don't think it's necessary. And if you don't have 3 great people who really work together, then I don't know why they force it. I think that is clearly the case here. But with Breen, it used to be widely understood that Mike Breen was the best NBA play-by-play voice. Like everybody agreed universally of that. I think that has changed over the past little while in the public sentiment. I have my personal preferences, whatever. That's not really what I'm saying. Just kind of reading how people are on NBA Twitter or, the NBA subreddit or some of the sports media folks in our space. It feels like maybe Breen's not quite as unimpeachable as he used to be, and not quite the top dog, no matter who you're talking to person. Maybe that's because somebody like Tirico has entered the fray. Ian Eagle's profile has continued to build and build as a national NBA guy. Now he's number 1 at Amazon, whatever. But I agree with you about Mike Breen. I feel like there are times when he dominates, and I think you've seen that a lot as the analysts around him have cycled in and out. And that's an understandable instinct for him to have, right? Because if you just quickly go through it, a few years ago, he was still with Van Gundy and Jackson. Then it's Doc Rivers. Then it's, Doc and Doris. Then it's JJ and Doris. Then it's Doris alone. Then it's Doris and Jefferson. Now it's Legler and Jefferson. Like, anyone would be panicked trying to keep up with that and probably overcompensating a little bit. But I think the broadcast would benefit from him allowing that to breathe. And I think especially because they have now found what I don't even think Redick had, even though he is a coach now, what Doris doesn't really have, and what they've been missing since Doc left and Van Gundy got laid off is a coach voice, which I think Tim Legler really brings to the broadcast. He's not a coach. He's coached high school. He was obviously a player in his day, but that's been a while. And I think he brings more of a coach's mindset now. And those are the guys that you can trust to kind of pick up the pieces of the game and almost be that kind of second play-by-play in terms of catching the action and relaying it to the viewer more. And I think that the trust especially needs to be there between Breen and Legler. That's the part that I feel like needs to come along to get to where it was with Breen and Van Gundy. which was amazing. One of the best, I think, like tandems we've had in broadcasting, even though they had a third, obviously, too, with Jackson. So yeah, that's kind of where I am with it. And I feel like Jefferson is in this spot where he kind of has to fill in as the kind of mindset guy. Like he's sort of just there to give you what the player's mindset is. But he wasn't an elite player, and obviously neither was I, no shade, but like it's a little strange, I think, to kind of slot things in because I feel like Richard Jefferson doesn't have anywhere to go a lot of the time. But what do you feel about Breen? Do you think it's actually some kind of slide, or do you think that it is just trying to kind of wrangle everybody?
I think it's the latter. I mean, I think if you want to compare the booth that he originally was with Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson and say, he was LeBron with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, and now he's back with, he's with the Cavs and has some dealing with, J.R. Smith and throwing another role player there and trying to see how it works out. And maybe that's why he's a little bit more ball dominant and just because there's been kind of a rotating door of the cast of characters that they have. You would feel like just because Richard was in the booth before that they would have a little bit more chemistry, and that just didn't really exist to me. I mean, granted, I've watched a lot of the games, but this is the first one where I spent an innate amount of time analyzing everything that they have to say and paying less so attention to the game itself. And it could have just been one of those nights. I mean, I have in my notes, I wrote, are they a good, bad game booth? Probably not, but does that matter? Mm-hmm. So I think Breen is the ball dominant point guard here. And like you said, it's understandable. Could he allow the broadcast to breathe it sometimes? Yeah, for sure. But I feel like when he did, there was almost dead air because I don't know if Legler or RJ really knew when to like kind of chime in there. Like they were kind of being led by him. But I think
one of the things about Breen too, just I think too, like there are every NBA play-by-play announcer, like you said, dominates the broadcast. That's just how the sport works because there's so much action. It's the same with hockey. But I feel like where Ian Eagle, Kevin Harlan, Marv Albert, where those guys soak up the energy of a broadcast with their own voice where they soak up the broadcast is with their energy is what I meant to say. And whereas Breen, I feel like soaks up the broadcast with just words and descriptions. And that's where I think sometimes it can get a little bit repetitive, redundant, a little bit dry, is he's just telling you a lot of things versus really crescendoing and having that dynamic stuff that all those other guys I listed, we all have so many memories of them with their huge moments and their huge, and with Breen, it's sort of just, there's the bangs, but a lot of the stuff in between is, like you're saying, kind of the intricacies of the game. And that does get a little bit boring, especially if it comes at the detriment of the other guys.
Well, I messaged you while I was watching this, and I had stepped away out of the room for a couple of minutes. And I almost felt like I was listening to the game on radio, just kind of how the way that he dominated the conversation and also was just kind of peppering in things that you couldn't really see. I mean, granted, he was kind of throwing things out there, like things that like could easily, and I don't know how easy it is. I'm not in the truck. I'm not behind the scenes, how easy it is to throw up a graphic on there. Excuse me. But I felt like sometimes there were things that could just probably be on a graphic that he kind of made sure to stuff in there. So it almost felt like he's a radio guy and he's not. So maybe it's a product of what we just talked about, but he is a very, very dominant guy. And it's kind of whether your opinion, it's an opinion based on whether you think that's a good thing for an NBA play-by-play guy or not. I mean, everybody has their preferences.
I think it will get better with Legler. I find Tim Legler, I mean, I wrote a feature on him early when I started at Awful Announcing. I think he's probably, for my money, the sharpest NBA analyst working. He does multiple podcast things now. He occasionally will pop into studio stuff, and on games, he's awesome. I feel like he's going to earn that trust with Breen over time, and it shouldn't be a problem. Where I feel like, though, the Jefferson the interest is the Jefferson side, because I just think some people are better in a studio space. And I don't feel like that has to be a problem. In fact, I feel like for a while that was the desirable place to be for a lot of former players. I mean, inside the NBA is the most obvious illustration of that on the basketball side, right? And I guess I just, Magic Johnson, Bill Walton, people like that also called games, but I think Richard Jefferson's really great giving takes, being kind of like he kind of plays like the wiser older brother on his podcast, even though he's kind of a jokester a lot of the time. And I actually like him in that setting too, to kind of be like that older brother who calms the younger siblings down and gives them like, all right, enough's enough, stop laughing, let me tell you what's really going on here type of guy. And I feel like when he was doing some more studio for ESPN, I have more memories of sharp moments from Jefferson in those environments than I do of what he's done on games since then, And so I just think he doesn't have an obvious kind of niche and lane on these games as to what am I listening for Richard Jefferson to tell me that nobody else does. It's not that he's not smart enough to do it or that he doesn't know about the game, but I don't know what his point of view is. And I listen, like we're saying. I mean, Legler is great, and Breen is an innings eater, sort of. And I don't know if there is going to be that space for Jefferson to carve out what his niche necessarily is. He kind of feels like the chemistry guy, like the locker room guy on the call. And I don't know if that's needed on a sports broadcast. I don't know whereas on a studio, it's really valuable.
Yeah.
It's good to have a guy like that.
Well, I wrote in my notes, and I wrote Jefferson says the obvious things, and then Legler builds off of it. And I think that's kind of really telling. But also, there's no shame in, like you just said, in having to work in the studio as opposed to being, a color commentator. There's no shame in that. Some people are better at one than they are the other. It's just kind of how it is. And I agree with you.
I think JJ Redick's the same way, by the way. I don't think he was great on games, but he had so many moments that cut through on studio shows or his podcast,
Well, yeah, it's just one of those things where it's a time constraint thing where Jefferson maybe has, 7 to 10 seconds or 15 to add like a point in game. And it might just be like, talking about like somebody boxing out for a rebound, as opposed to like if he's on a studio show, he might get him a minute to really explain like what he's seeing and break it down from a player's perspective. I think Legler has that part down to where not the latter, but the former part down to where like he can tell you something intelligent without talking down to you in a short amount of time. And I don't know if Richard has been able to really do that beyond pointing out to you the obvious. I mean, I said to you that he offered some insightful analysis and on like maybe like a dead possession, if I recall correctly. But that was like well into the second quarter at that point. Before then, he was just kind of throwing obvious like cliches out there, and not really going into the weeds and being expansive about from a player's point of view, which is why he is on the broadcast. I think Legler almost kind of handles both the coach and player perspective, even though he's not a coach. He I don't know. He's just very intelligent, and that's not to say that Richard isn't. Richard is very good at basketball analysis. I just don't know if that is a fit for his skill set being on a three-man booth and being the third man, even though he is more, so to speak, tenured on this booth than Legler himself.
Well, you look at it, right? And right now, NBC and Amazon have guys like this. Jamal Crawford is the third on the top NBC booth. He also calls games as just the only analyst sometimes too, but and then Dwayne Wade on Amazon. And in both cases, those guys just cut through largely because they're more recognizable players from their playing careers, and they have more of a clear perspective as to what they value and kind of who they are in their perspective. And I think that's what I'm lacking with Richard Jefferson, and maybe that comes over time. Again, you say he's the most tenured, obviously, sort of in jest, like it's only been a year for him, and you'd hope that would get better, especially with the chemistry building with this trio in particular. But That's what I think he needs to find. You said you had a big picture question or two. Did we get to them? Is there
Yeah,
anything we need to close on here?
there's two of them that I had. The one
Yeah.
is I said the ceiling of the booth feels bigger with Legler, but is it better? And two,
Mm-hmm.
they are not a good bad game booth, which I think I already mentioned this already. And the Warriors Lakers game wasn't close at all.
Is
But I
any
said, does that
basketball
matter?
broadcast a good, yeah, is any basketball broadcast a good booth on a bad game? I feel like a bad basketball game, it's just over. You just turn it off.
Maybe if you have Iron Eagle, I don't know. Maybe Iron Eagle. Maybe I'm just thinking that from the perspective of a Mets fan, and knowing that Gary, Keith, and Ron can give me like a great 9 innings without the game having to be good. Maybe that just isn't basketball, but I
The
don't know.
Van Gundy brothers basically would turn some dull games or, standstill does into podcasts, basically. Like it just became a podcast about the NBA, whether that's rules or trends or a particular player and their take on that player. Like Van Gundy will just hate on Joel Embiid for 60 minutes if he needs to. Like there's no real problem for him on that. But yeah, I get your point. At least for now, evaluating them, I was like, I'm not going to judge them too harshly on a bad game, but I get your point. And it's probably not, I think, because I think in those cases, you kind of want, like, I guess a famous person, really, for a bad game. You kind of
Yeah.
want, like, a really well-known celebrity figure to just kind of start riffing at that point,
Well,
But
they waited until the third quarter to kind of roll out like some of those things where you would do in a bad game, and not necessarily this was pre-planned, like the 10th anniversary of the double bang. I mean, they waited until like the end of the third quarter and then interviewed Steph. And granted, that was a pre-planned thing, but I mean, when they talked about the Santos from Golden State and maybe spent like 5 to 10 minutes on that because and it was great timing because he was like had a little mini run there where he was sinking shots and it worked out well, but it almost felt like, all right, we got to talk about this because there's not much else to do and this is a good story, as opposed to like and kind of getting lucky that he started to really heat up there, as opposed to like using that earlier on when that news is kind of fresh and maybe it wasn't as applicable. And I don't really remember if he was on the floor much in the first half. That could be something that I did not notice, but I just felt like they kind of were like, all right, nothing's going well here. Let's go to this wall. It's a great story. And it just happened he just happened to be playing well when they were talking about him. Sometimes those things work out.
You said Legler, the booth might just be better with just him and Breen. I think you might be right. It sounds like we both feel that way as of how things stand right now. But as much as I can say, ESPN has kind of led the charge on insisting on these 3-man booths. Feels like the rest of the industry is following suit, and that just seems to be the deal for basketball broadcasts right now. I mean, the Final Four broadcast has 3 guys in it. Mm-hmm. The WNBA and women's college doesn't. Rebecca Lobo holds it down by herself over there. But NBC, like I said, Reggie Miller and Jamal Crawford now are the number one over there. And then Amazon, I don't know what their hierarchy is. They seem to be kind of chaotic as to who's calling a game on a given night. Van Gundy and Eagle is sort of the default number one, but I could see them plugging one of the players in by the time the postseason comes around, whether that's Wade, Nash, or Candace Parker. And I think that'll probably be what they settle into. So it feels like that's just what NBA broadcasting is. And if you're ESPN, this is probably the trio that makes the most sense for right now. And I think you just hope that the chemistry does come along and these guys kind of find their lanes and balance each other a little bit better. And Breen starts to trust them and we get a more of a rollicking group. I will just say, I think that this trio works better than Doris Burke and Richard Jefferson did last year.
Agreed.
And so I guess that means arrows trending up, all things considered, from where they were and the changes they've made.
And we know Richard Jefferson isn't going anywhere. ESPN, brought him back, and there was interest from external, whether I think it was Amazon who had shown interest in him. And we know that they obviously view him as a part of their future. So they're going to try and make this work. And maybe it will. Maybe we'll come back here and talk during the finals and be just amazed about how, the 3 of them work together. But, they still have some time to get there. And maybe time is the factor they need. But a lot of inconsistency, I would say, and up and downs, even if the arrow is trending up during that broadcast.
That'll wrap us up for today. We're back on YouTube and X Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern. So follow us here if you haven't already. Subscribe on YouTube. Hit that little bell maybe and get a notification when a new video goes up. Check us out at Awful Announcing across social media and awfulannouncing.com in the meantime for all of the latest sports media coverage.